Hi, I'm Lester Babiera, and this is Tambike Session, a podcast where we talk about cycling and everything that revolves around it. By now, nakita mo na siguro na sobrang daming nagbabike sa Metro Manila. Our roads have bike lanes, and bike racks can be seen in different establishments and businesses. Kung di man ikaw, I'm pretty sure meron kang kaibigang nagbabike ngayong pandemic. Ako, isa ako sa mga madaming Filipinos na nagsimulang magbike ngayong community quarantine, and na-enjoy ko pa rin siya until now. Among the many benefits of cycling and yung fun na kasama niya, ang pinaka na-enjoy ko talaga ay yung mga tambike. E di yung pupunta ka lang sa mga cafe, restaurants, o kaya in the middle of a bike ride, hinto kayo ng kaibigan mo tapos magkikwentuhan lang kayo. You can talk about bikes, favorite destinations, or kamustahan. So today, kasama ko si Anton Siy. Siya yung head ng Pasig Transport. Tinutulungan niya yung mga Pasigeños to move through transport policies and programs. Madalas kong katambik si Anton, and now we'll talk about how fun it is to bike in Metro Manila, the advocacy, and how cycling can help improve our cities. Hi Anton, welcome to Tambike Session.
Hi Lester, good afternoon. It's really nice to be here. Maraming salamat po for having me on this podcast.
Anton, when did you last ride the bicycle?
Oh, yesterday actually. I think yesterday was actually a great day for me because in the morning I got up early and said, you know what, I'm gonna go up to Antipolo via Sumulong in the morning before going to work. So that's my first time doing it on a weekday where you have a little time pressure because you need to make it back to the office to do work. Even though it's a pandemic, it was one of those days where I had to be in the office. So it was kind of exciting actually. Just knowing that I had to make it back in time for work, so I couldn't rest as often. But luckily enough, I was able to get it done, and it's a really big boost of confidence to know that you can do that basically, and it just opened another way for me to exercise during the week.
What time did you ride out?
Well, I rode out a little later than I had planned actually. I got up a little earlier, but I was only able to ride out by around 6:30. But I think next time, for a better experience and maybe so I'm not under so much pressure, I'd probably recommend riding out from by around 6, maybe if you live in Pasig. Then if you can like maybe adjust it a little upwards or downwards depending on where you live.
So how long did your trip go? Anong route yung ginawa mo from Pasig?
Okay. Well, basically what I did was I biked through Pasig and came out Marcos Highway on Marilaki Highway through the northern tip of Pasig and barangays De La Paz, I think, is at the top. And so from there, I just rode along the highway, then turned right on Sumbulong Highway, right around SM Masinag, right? So I don't actually recall how long it took me going up. It wasn't a very fast ride at all because you know how it is dito sa mga when you're going up Sumulong, you really parang wala eh. You're not, if you try to go fast, you'll go even slower because you have to rest. So it's really a matter of getting into your lowest gear and just making sure that you don't stop moving. Even if you're slow, you just have to keep moving, right? So yun eh. I actually don't know kung gaano siya katagal to get up. But then on the way down, of course, it's much faster. You're basically just like rolling downhill. The hardest part was when I got back. I thought I could go back Ortigas all the way, but there was too much traffic when I got down. So I just took a detour, then went through Pasig on the way back to our house in Ortigas.
Well, yeah, that was fun. Magandang mood booster yan for the day. Tapos yung exercise din siya at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I'd highly advise to anyone. I think it's nice some days to get up early and to go on a bike ride. Doesn't always have to be up to Antipolo, but then if you like cycling, it's nice to be able to pick a route that you can do before you go to work, and then just like have that in your mind to do those days when you need a boost.
Just to give you a brief background, nakilala ko si Anton dahil sa work niya sa Pasig Transport. Gumagawa kasi ako ng stories for the cycling website, First Bike Ride, tungkol sa mga developments ng bike infrastructure sa mga bawat cities. Tapos nakita ko na ang impressive ng ginagawa ng Pasig. And apparently, it was Anton. Ayun, tas from there, naging connected kami through Instagram, nagkakasama kami sa mga different bike events, and Eventually, nagtatambay kami together with other friends. Pero kasi it's really impressive kasi yung Pasig, madami na siyang nagawang bike infrastructure for the people even before the pandemic. And I saw na merong importance na binibigay sa mga cyclist. So my question is, bakit importante yung cycling sa Pasig?
The thing about cycling kasi is that it's one of those things where it's a mode of transport that I think has really been, not given its due importance over the last, the last how many decades of Philippine transportation planning. Actually, I think as long as there have been cyclists, there's always been bicycle advocacy. And, I don't want to discredit any of the advocates who came before, but then it's not like, I think it's one of those things where, you always need a moment for any type of advocacy. And I think, I think unfortunately, I always wish it could have come earlier. But I think it seems that the moment that cycling advocacy was waiting for was the pandemic, where I think for many reasons, I think number one, the fear of crowding that people had led people to bike instead of taking public transportation going to work. I think number two, there were also restrictions placed on public transportation, and I think those restrictions may not have been entirely good looking back at them. But then I think just the lack of public transportation supply also got people to take up biking just to give back their independence and give back their control over their time. I think one other factor I noticed when it came to cycling was that during the pandemic also, another thing that pushed was that a lot of the traditional sports activities like basketball and gyms, that was banned during the pandemic because of the fear of infection in these indoor spaces. So, in addition to the push from bicycle commuting, there was also a push to cycling from people looking for alternative forms of exercise and recreation. I think what's surprising to me is that I keep hearing of groups of friends from different schools saying that may barkada sila, and then instead of playing basketball, since it's not allowed anymore, a lot of their people in their groups have switched to cycling, and I think that's really cool to see. So
Yes.
I think that's generally true for all of the Philippines, and I think in Pasig it became especially important to us, where, like I mentioned, there were restrictions on public transport earlier in the pandemic, and as the head of the transport planning office in Pasig City, I think it was really a crucial moment for us to figure out how we can keep the city operations going, despite the fact that there's a pandemic and that there's no public transport. So dun talaga, because at least I bike. I know how liberating it was for me, and a lot of my staff bike. I'm really proud to say. So we all basically tried to, in addition to supplementing public transport supply with the vehicles available in the city, we really tried to make a big push for biking, to make Pasig bike friendly, just so that all the essential workers during the pandemic would be able to travel safely using a bicycle.
Pero even before Pasig has been trying to become bike friendly with the bike sharing program, yung protected bike lane sa Ortigas. Can cycling really help a city?
Yeah, of course. I think the thing about cycling in a city is that I think sometimes cities think they have a choice. Na do we want to promote cycling or not? Do we want to build all of this bike infrastructure or not? Or do we want people to cycle in our city or not? And I think one thing you see all over the world is that even in the cities that are consciously making choices against cycling, there's always people trying to bike. Because when you look at what cycling is, it's really a mode of private transport that's accessible to many people, doesn't require a lot of ongoing cost, it isn't expensive to get into. People are going to find ways to cycle and find ways to cycle for essential purposes and recreation, whether or not your city is friendly to them. So the choice that cities have, I mean, when they ask the question, like I guess maybe when you ask the question if cycling can help cities, I think sometimes cities ask that, and they presuppose that they have to decide whether or not cycling will help them. But I think maybe it's important for cities to realize that cycling does help them, and maybe the better question to ask is, do you want to help cyclists, right?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Apart from getting from point A to point B, I guess you can consider yourself as a bike commuter. Tapos nakikita ko you do some leisure riding during the weekends or after work. You really enjoy bike rides, no, Anton?
I really do. And I think maybe this is something where it's become an evolution for me, so cycling in particular. I think at first, when I first got into cycling, it was really a case at the time when I I was also quite new to transport advocacy in general. I had just finished studying about transportation dun sa master's ko in the UK. So, as a, within, so I started really in the transport policy space, not really going into it as a cyclist. So, of course, it was still new to me back then. But then I think I would say that it was only over the course of the pandemic where I really started to embrace the leisure riding side of cycling. I was a bike commuter before I became someone who, I really learned to enjoy cycling and going on long rides, just going on urban rides around the city, and just doing it for fun to clear my head. So that part of it, that side of it, to me is rather a new experience for me. Where I think it was only recently. It's only recently for me, I have to admit, where I go to sleep thinking about where to ride my bike, and getting up in the morning thinking about where to ride my bike after work. So I guess you'd say, I guess I'm both a commuter and a leisure rider, and it was really, and I guess maybe I'm only recently learning to be a leisure rider.
Ako naman, I enjoy cycling because I get to meet friends and I get to get out of the house. Kasi stuck tayo nun for months, di ba? Medyo nakakabalo yun eh. Now I want to know, what do you enjoy most about cycling?
I think it's the seeing places more for me. I think like you said, during the pandemic, we've a lot of people have been cooped up inside the house. I think some people who had plans to travel around the Philippines or go abroad, I think that's been you've had many people have had to put those plans on hold because
Yeah.
even now, if flying out is even though it's technically kind of allowed, I think it's still out of reach for a lot of
Yeah.
people because now you have to budget so long for quarantine hotel stays. You have to budget more money for RT-PCR tests or whatever when you depart or when you arrive. So I think for me, cycling, being able to see new places and being able to discover, the freedom of feeling na I can go there on my bike pala. I think that's really that's really currently my favorite feeling of it. I also really like it for exercise. I think exercise is a really important thing for me. There's some people I think whose brains work better when they're exercising, and I think I may not always look it, but I'm that kind of person actually where I think exercise is really important to good mental performance for me, and cycling gives me that.
So what are your favorite cycling activities in Metro Manila? Saan ka madalas pumupunta?
Actually, sometimes I think the ultra uphill. It's one of those so basically the ultra uphill is this part in Pasig that where you come down from like Lanuza Avenue coming from C5, and you go up the steeper slope going towards Capitol Commons. And it's a great training ride actually. It's a loop that you can do while while you're going around the city. It's not bad at all. Sometimes after work, I like to take urban loops going all the way to QC and different parts of Manila. And I think at night also, at night it's also pretty fun. I don't get to do so much urban riding at night, but usually in that part, late afternoon is my favorite time to ride. I think sometimes actually, parang when you come from work in Pasig, it's actually not so hard on a bike to make it all the way to even parts of Manila like Malate and Quiapo, and then like come back through the other side, coming back through Quezon City, and then coming back to Pasig. It makes a nice little loop that anyone can do, really. And that's I think when you do that, it really reminds you that the city is very bikeable.
Okay, so mas madaming nagbabike ngayon and sobrang saya ko whenever I see so many cyclists on the road, even on social media, lalo na kapag nakakasabay ko sila sa intersection. Actually, I feel safe kapag sobrang dami namin. Sabi nga nila, di ba, parang there's safety in numbers. How was it before? Ano yung observations mo pre-pandemic? Sino yung mga madalas mong kasama?
Dun before the pandemic actually, may makikita ka talagang mga bike commuters. I think a lot of them, I think traditionally, di ba, yung view of many people was that bike commuters are traditionally laborers or yung mga tao na parang who do it kasi wala silang budget to take public transportation or something or nanggaling sa malayo. And to an extent, of course, that's true. Na marami talagang people who are working blue-collar jobs like construction workers na or security guards especially yung mga madalas mong makikitang nagbabike. But then there, of course, I think it was already picking up where you see professionals from other offices also getting into cycling. But it's still a rare sight eh. Parang I think it was still one of those things where I think you generally would not be taken seriously by many offices or many building managers kung sabihin mo na gusto mong mag-bike to work. And I think this still reflects, unfortunately, dun sa perception ng mga building managers na parang ayaw nila mag-provide ng bike rack, ganun. But I think there were, of course, I mean, back then it was really like the Ken of the, I think you had to be like very brave and a little unconventional to consider it for in terms of like everyday cycling. Siyempre parang andun yung mga sports cyclists, yung mga favorite natin, yung mga biker din ako, di ba? Those sorts of people. But oh yeah. But I think maybe it's really changed in a lot of ways. Oh, and by the way, I have to say, it was still very male dominated back then. Parang rare ka talaga makakita ng babaeng bike commuter. Meron naman, pero I think it was much rarer back then before the pandemic. I think it's in contrast to now. After the pandemic, syempre for all the reasons we talked about earlier, mas dumadami yung mga cyclists. One thing you observe is that there's like a nice youthful energy to it. I think there's an aspect of like coolness when it comes to cycling and cycling around the city that you see. It's a very like cool 20-something. I'm gonna try this, try something new in the world kind of energy, and I think that's really fun to see. And I think that energy, parang medyo wala pa siya noon eh. I think it wasn't something that's really becoming seen as a cool hobby before,
Yeah.
but I think now that is, and I think it's a really nice thing to see.
And people saw during this pandemic that cycling in Metro Manila is actually fun. Biking to work is fun. And it's not really that difficult na iisipin nila na mahirap, pawisan. And now, we have better bike infrastructure. Before kasi parang it's rare to see a bike lane on the road eh. Kasi mga motorista parang foreign yung concept sa kanila na may nagtatraverse na bisikleta sa kalsada. So, maybe kaya hindi sila ganun ka-careful before. Was it difficult back then when we don't have this kind of experience in traffic?
Oh, I think back then kasi yung mga motorista noon, I think before, I think cycling, not only did not many people do it, there wasn't as much of a broader conversation in our media and culture about cycling. And I think now maybe many more road users in the Philippines know someone who cycles at least recreationally, if not someone who cycles to work. It's hard to say that there's been a big overall shift in terms of yung behavior ng motorists and road users towards cyclists. But I think you're starting to see it little by little. I think maybe sometimes this might lead to certain tensions. I think, syempre, parang you see this in many parts of the world where every time there's talk about making policy better for cyclists, I think there's always some opposition na parang masyado nating pinapabor yung mga cyclists, ganun. And I think it's I think maybe sometimes it's not always like productive to say that we're tilting the balance too much in favor of cyclists. Because of course I think the objective has to be different when you're trying to do good transportation policy. I think attitudes are starting to change little by little, but we still have to put some work in to get to a culture where we treat people, we treat everybody well on the road. And I think maybe that's kind of where we have to talk about how our laws and our infrastructure can also help create that culture.
I really believe that it's possible to have fun and at the same time push for the developments of this bike infrastructure to make things easier for cycling. Ikaw, how do you do it? Have fun and at the same time advocate? Kasi it can be very toxic and people will just say, oh, magbike ka na lang, kaya mo naman yan eh. Diba? Kasi in social media, ang daming negative comments. I want to know, how do you do it? Parang have fun and at the same time advocate?
Well, I think the key naman to cycling is that the number one thing I always tell people is that if you're going to bike, you have to have fun. I think it's impossible not to have fun when it comes to cycling. You have to enjoy it. You have to enjoy the lifestyle. You have to enjoy riding a bike in order to be a good advocate. I think, and I think all the advocates naman that we work with in the Philippines are like this. I think it's definitely a space where it's impossible not to have fun when you're on a bike, no matter what you're doing, whether you're commuting or riding for strictly recreation, just trying to put on the miles, whether you're trying to go far or go fast. It's impossible not to have fun. So I think maybe the logical extension naman of when you talk about a hobby that's so fun. Of course, the job we're trying to make it better for people and make more people get into cycling. Of course, it's going to be fun, and I actually find there's a lot of fun in my job. Of course, there's a lot of frustration because, syempre, you're trying to change culture. Like I said, you make a lot of people unhappy. I think there's some people who are not happy to see the status quo being changed. Often these are the people who are very comfortable with the way the road is allocated now. They don't want to see anything change, or they're not happy with the way you're changing things. And sometimes that's frustrating. Of course, any job naman, you have some days where it's so bad that you want to quit and do something else. Even in this job, there are days like that. But on the whole, I think I consider myself very lucky to be able to do this kind of work, and I wish more people would try to do this also.
When I started my cycling advocacy, parang feeling ko natural lang siyang nangyari. When I started meeting friends, yung na-feel ko yung kailangan kong i-assert yung space ko, and then I became friends with you and other cycling advocates. But for others who want to go into the advocacy, is it hard to advocate cycling?
Yeah, I don't think it's hard naman to become a cycling advocate. I think maybe the number one thing you have to be when you're an advocate is that I think you just have to have a desire to make things better for people and to make the world a better place for people that get into cycling. So I think maybe the good thing for many people who want to be advocates now is that there's many places to start and many groups to work with. A lot of the groups that are into cycling right now are members of this group called the Move As One Coalition. They're a large multi-sectoral group that focuses on making transportation better in the Philippines. They're composed of many other different advocacy groups, but one of their objectives really is to make better cycling policy by working with the Philippine government and other groups. So I think Move As One Coalition, they're definitely one of the first groups you should look for when it comes to advocating cycling and starting this kind of work. Also, if you're a transport professional that wants to get interested in the more technical side of advocacy, Alt Mobility PH is a group of transport advocates and transport professionals that the work there is a little more technical part of the advocacy. And I think that's also very interesting for people that are like engineers, architects, planners, or even someone who's just very interested. If you want to get more involved in some of the policy proposals that get a little more technical.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And this group is very friendly with newcomers, right?
Yeah, of course. I think it's I think the thing is when you're a cyclist naman, the most important thing is that I think all advocates naman are really happy to be working with other people and to learn that there are more people who believe in the same things. So I think the more people that are trying to advocate, the more people who want to join this movement, the better.
Ako personally was not really into the technical stuff before, like bike lanes and policies, yung wala akong idea at all about it. It's really a learning process and I get to be educated as time goes. Until now, ito yung tanong ng madami. Is there a right or wrong kind of advocating cycling? Kasi madaming rules, di ba? Like traffic rules, tas madaming preconceived notions na dapat naka-helmet ka, dapat sa bike lane ka lang, dapat di ka nagbi-beat ng red light, dapat di ka ganun kabilis. Is there a right or wrong thinking when you're advocating?
Siyempre naman with advocacy, I think of course when you're talking about advocacy, you have to advocate for things you believe in. So I think number one, kung advocate ka, you have to believe in what you're fighting for and what you're trying to change. It's impossible naman to be able to go to the government or go to a transport planner working for the government and fight for something you don't believe in. Parang hindi naman yun maganda. I think maybe another general rule for advocates is that you have to approach your advocacy with empathy. I think this is something where that's propped up cycling move. I think that's tripped up some cycling movements in the past. I think in the past there was some people who advocated for a type of cycling called, I believe it's called vehicular cycling, where the style of advocacy they were trying to advocate was for cyclists to cycle very fast and to basically behave like a car when you're on the road. That's good points to this kind of advocacy. But I think in general, the effect of that kind of advocacy has been to shut out, erase, and invalidate the experience of many cyclists, like PWD cyclists or non-athletic, less athletic cyclists who just cannot cycle in that manner. And I think maybe if there was more empathy in that movement, maybe they would not have advocated those things. So I think this is good now because many advocates now are approaching the advocacy with a lot more empathy by trying to bring in more PWDs, people of different genders, people of different economic situations, and making sure that their voices are heard and that their importance in the cycling community and advocacy is also recognized. So unang-una, parang I think you have to believe what you're fighting for. And I think second, dapat talaga may empathy when you're going to be an advocate.
I really like what you said about empathy kasi other people are unaware na some of these Filipinos who ride the bike, they really don't know how traffic works eh. How do they turn right? How do they turn left? Especially when they're faced with mga signs and lights on the road. Kasi, I don't know, maybe because they are not educated about it. Wala naman silang driver's license eh. And then I meet other people who really can't afford helmets or even bike lights. So I think empathy really works best when you're advocating cycling.
I think it's really important there. I think another example actually is that I get to talk to a lot of cyclists. I think also a lot of advocates also who are very quick to speak out against cyclists who are counterflowing. I think there are many advocates who think it's who believe it's very important to loudly say that cyclists should follow all the road rules and yun nga parang behave like a car. It's a legacy of vehicular cycling. But the example I like to bring up is yung counterflowing because I think for many urban cyclists in the Philippines, syempre parang when you see them counterflowing on the side of the sidewalk, if you're coming down the quote-unquote right way of the road, it can be very disorienting for a cyclist or a motor vehicle user coming down that way. But I think maybe if you approach the situation with empathy, a lot of the times you'll see that whenever you see a counterflowing cyclist, it's always a case where it's very hard for them to make a U-turn or a left turn to get to the other direction. And then if you examine the rest of the road along where they're counterflowing, oftentimes you'll see the place where you have to make a U-turn is sometimes, sometimes it's very difficult to make. Sometimes you have to cycle very fast and swerve across multiple lanes of traffic. And then oftentimes it's less safe for them to do that than to just counterflow, right? And maybe the real solution isn't to judge them for counterflowing, but to provide a better design at the intersection or to lower the speed limit so that it's easier for them to switch lanes.
To be honest, dati, I find it kind of difficult to accept people counterflowing, especially bicycles. Pero wala eh. Parang I realized eventually na they're doing it because it's inconvenient and it's the safest for them. So, kamusta yung Metro Manila in terms of biking for you right now? We've seen many bike lanes. Some of it are really protected. Do you think it's better or it needs to be improved pa?
I think it's better, but I think there's also a lot of things that have to be improved. When it comes to cycling, is that we've made a big shift. I think we've made good starts with the infrastructure, but then we still haven't, I think, gotten to a standard that really makes the infrastructure applicable and usable for all ages and abilities of cyclists. So I think we really have to do better here, and I think unfortunately, in some cities, there are moves to actually reverse the installation of protected bike lanes. And I think it's very important, especially right now we're recording this, the elections are coming up. It's important for people to know we should demand that our leaders that we're going to elect have good platforms regarding cycling and that they're going to protect, advance, and make the cycling infrastructure even better for everybody. Hindi tayo pwedeng parang maging paurong dito eh. We really have to keep moving forward when it comes to making cycling better.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think there are many other factors aside from road infrastructure for bicycles. It's not just the bike lanes, I think, but also about safety, parking.
For a lot of this infrastructure, like safe parking, I think, for instance, is really important and very underrated. And I think we still have to do a lot better in that regard. Voting out that we can see bike lanes on some of our major roads, but I think having good bike parking is the real next step. I think it's important for requirements for bike parking to be discussed and maybe even mandated nationally just to make sure that all buildings everywhere in the Philippines will become bikeable. Because I think that's how you build the number of bikers. And, when there are more bikers on the road, it's safer for everybody who's cycling and safer for other road users as well. Because if you can get these people out of cars, then that reduces the chance of car crashes on the road. It's really important din kasi to talk about when you're trying to promote cycling. Parang it's not just bike lanes. It's things like bike parking. It's things like making financing of bicycles more available to people so that they can buy high quality bicycles that they can use every day. It's also about promoting things like e-bike regulations that help promote the technology instead of restrict it so that people who aren't as able as the most elite athletes can also buy a bicycle that will help them commute.
So aside from better bike parking, better bike lanes, better roads, I think sana mas madaming puno. Kasi minsan talaga mainit eh. And yun, I also wish na sana respetuhin tayo ng mga motorista. I-observe lang yung speed limit kasi parang hindi siya ganong na-observe. I think. Ikaw, do you have other wish?
Yeah, I think maybe having more bike lanes, more bike parking is good. It would be really good to have the government focus a lot more on road safety. I think it's so terrible when people die in a car crash or when people are seriously injured in car crashes or motorcycle crashes because no one wants that to happen. But
Mm.
then, if your policy is not focused on reducing road crash deaths and road crash injuries, they will just keep happening. So it's really important to be able to have a policy where your goal is to bring your road crash deaths and your road crash injuries all the way down to zero. And this is possible. It's something called Vision Zero. It's really about making sure your street design, you design the streets in a safe manner, and you also enforce speed limits. It's not impossible to do this. You already have automated speed limit regulation using speed cameras in other countries. The technology is mature, it's readily available. And I think if we start applying it here, it'll be better for everybody, including cyclists, because the number one fear people have when cycling is getting injured or killed in a car crash or a motor vehicle crash. So I think if you can make it safer, that'll really help promote cycling.
Bicycles are very much visible and ayun, meron na tayong mga bike lanes, some of it permanent. As we move forward and as the pandemic progress, cars try to go back on the roads as well. Sabi ng iba, hanggang pandemic lang daw yung biking and everything will go back to the pre-pandemic traffic. What do you think about this?
I think it's kind of sad to hear people say that because returning to the pre-pandemic situation, I think it's not something anyone should really want, and I think it's not something people want, and it's also something that we shouldn't treat as inevitable because we can see that at least as far as cycling, the pandemic, good things happened during the pandemic. We shouldn't just reverse that to go back to what it was before, but I think we should find ways to keep encouraging the growth of cycling going forward. And we've seen this in other cities. I think in cities in Europe and cities elsewhere in Asia, they really kept promoting cycling even during and even after they had the worst COVID-19 surges. And I think we should have a similar attitude here, where we're trying to keep promoting cycling even beyond the pandemic.
Yeah, oo nga eh. Like what you said earlier, ang hirap bumalik sa dati and we have to keep moving forward. Ako naniniwala ako na we have to keep on making ourselves visible on the road. Kalampagin yung mga people in power. And at the same time, it's very crucial na we're electing new officials. Na sana yung mga taong susunod ay yung mga tao na who can maintain it. Do you think it's tricky or hard to go pushing cycling infrastructure here in the Philippines?
I don't necessarily think it's hard. I think I think even when you're in government, it's important that you feel strongly about what you want to see in the field. So if you're someone who's a transport planner, especially if you're someone who enters this field, how can you not want a better place for cycling, for public transportation, for pedestrians and PWDs, right? So I think for me it's not necessarily hard. Of course, there's some aspects of advocacy that you can't do directly, but I think when you're in government doing this kind of work, it's important to have like good cooperation with civil society, where you're always you're working in conjunction with the private sector and with civil society to keep making changes and keep pushing things forward, and to be able to find places where you can cooperate to change the not just the physical landscape but also the cultural and political landscape as well. I think this part is I think it's something that government officials, I think, I've learned in my job. You have to learn how to do in order to be effective. Parang when you're doing this kind of job, you can't just be a pencil pusher. You can't just be mindlessly applying things. You have to really, I think, be smart about where you can change things and work on work harder on the things that you still have to change. Part of the job, which isn't always easy, but I think it's still really important.
Cycling during this pandemic and seeing these developments, have you realized something about yourself or your city?
I don't know. I think maybe, yeah, I would say that during the pandemic, I think I really discovered another level of how much I loved cycling. Where I think besides just doing it for commuting, I just started to really enjoy like going on long rides or just going on long city rides with no particular objectives in mind. I think I discovered that. I think it's still an ongoing discovery in Pasig City that there's so much potential to bring new people into cycling and to bring more people into this kind of lifestyle and into this kind of transportation, which I really enjoy. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to another level, as we keep doing this work. So it's been really nice. I think the cool thing nga about cycling in the Philippines is that parang malayo pa tayo dun sa full potential niya. And I think I really always say this that Pasig is already a cycling city, and Metro Manila is also a big cycling metropolis. And I think we can bring it even further. I think we can really become one of the best cycling cities in the world.
I want to share na I rode with Anton one time going to Silang in Cavite. It's a 150-kilometer trip for me. And then, there was a point, so 5 kami, and there was a point na sobrang pagod na kaming apat. Pero nakita namin si Anton na parang swabe lang siyang umaahon eh. Nag-uphill siya, tas mabilis pa din siya. Parang di siya napapagod. So what's your cycling plan or next bike destination?
Oh gosh, I think maybe in the future, since I started to learn enjoying cycling too much, I think in the future I'd really like to do an Audax event. Audax is the style of cycling where you cycle, I think, 200 kilometers in 13 hours. You really have to do a lot of cycling. And I think other people who've done the Audax also tell me that the number one important thing when you do that is, you can't do it unless you really enjoy cycling. So I think the key is to enjoy cycling so much that it won't make you tired when you're doing it. But of course, there's also important things like technique that you have to consider. But I think the number one key really is to enjoy it and enjoy it so much that training for it is not difficult.
Well, Audax is pretty tough. Pero I think kayang-kaya mo yan.
Yeah, one day, one day.
Anton, conversations with you are always great. Ang dami ko na namang natutunan and I'm pretty sure na madami ring natutunan yung mga nakikinig sa atin ngayon. Maraming salamat for your time today. It's just really fun to ride the bike and it would be awesome if we push our cities to be better. Sana tuloy-tuloy ito. And that is it for today. Thank you very much for listening. This is Lester Babiera and I hope to see you in the next Tambike Session.